Welcome, I'm Joel Hellman. I'm Dean of the Walsh School of Foreign Service here at Georgetown University, and I can't tell you how pleased we are to gather here live and in person after so long. Let me also welcome our live stream audience. I know we have a huge audience here, all to welcome, of course, USAID Administrator Samantha Power, and to hear her vision for USAID on this remarkable day commemorating the 60th anniversary of this vital agency. I'm particularly pleased that Administrator Power has chosen to commemorate this anniversary here at the School of Foreign Service, the oldest school of international affairs in the United States. This school was created over a century ago at a global moment not unlike the current one. America was coming out of a lengthy war that caused unprecedented destruction. A global pandemic was raging. And America, as well as other countries around the world, was turning inwards, tired of the toll that global engagement had placed on the nation and fearful of further global entanglements. And that's what led to the inauguration of the very first school wholly dedicated to preparing a new generation of leaders in service to the world. And at that inauguration, not far from this podium, our founder, Father Edmund A. Walsh, said, "As unprepared as we were for war, we are resolved never to be unprepared for the peace." And for 60 years, USAID has been working to ensure that we are never unprepared for the peace. And at a moment when so many in the United States are tempted to turn inwards, we look to USAID to make the case that our peace and prosperity depend on robust engagement with the world, particularly with those parts of the world that are struggling to overcome poverty and entrenched inequality, that are still healing from the deep wounds of prolonged conflict and violence, and that are facing existential risks from climate change. So we at Georgetown and the School of Foreign Service, still the largest feeder school into the U.S. Foreign Service, are proud to have contributed to the ranks of USAID and its mission over the years, ranging from former leaders like Andrew Natsios, our beloved former Dean Carol Lancaster at the leadership level at USAID, and of course to the scores of graduates currently serving in USAID. Our master's degree in global human development, led by former USAID chief economist Steve Radelet, builds on the century-old tradition that we have embraced here to foster an approach to development based on the Jesuit principle of cura personalis, care for the whole person. So we are very proud to welcome you, Administrator Power, an eloquent chronicler of the horrors of genocidal violence, a passionate champion of human rights, and a seasoned diplomat at the helm of one of the world's most essential development agencies, to present your vision for the future of USAID. And to properly introduce her and our Payne Fellow, Katryna Mahoney, who will be moderating this event, one of our committed next generation of global leaders. Let me turn to our co-sponsor for this event, Liz Schrayer, the President and CEO of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, an organization that shows the way to reach beyond political polarization, to build coalition in support of America's leadership in diplomacy and development around the world. Liz.
So thank you, Dean Hellman. It is such a pleasure for USGLC to co-host this event with you, with Georgetown, with the School of Foreign Service. I see every day in my work the incredible contribution that you and your colleagues make, and it's really just kind of inspiring to join forces, to all be together in person, to welcome U.S. Administrator Samantha Power for what's going to be a really incredible conversation. Now, I have to tell you that every year, one of my favorite days is coming on campus here to each semester to invited by one of your professors, a friend of Samantha and mine, Secretary Madeleine Albright. She teaches a class that some of you students might have taken, the National Security Toolkit. And I am invited to guest lecture on the topic of aid as a national security tool. Now, I have to tell you, the students are always a bit aghast when I tell them that the legislation that guides our aid policy today was written in 1961 under President Kennedy. So think about this. We are still working under that framework as USAID celebrates its 60th year. Now, the good news is that USAID now has literally transformed and reformed the development policy, particularly since 9/11, delivering remarkable results and a return on investment to the American public. Now, while we don't have time for me to give my entire lecture on transformational results and reform, here's what I want to tell you. In the last 10 years alone, there's been over 50 bipartisan bills that have been signed into law to advance effective development policy. Everything from water to food security to fighting HIV/AIDS to empowering women and girls. And they have been sponsored and supported by everyone from members of the Freedom Caucus to the Progressive Caucus. So yes, why Washington doesn't particularly agree on very much today, in terms of development policy, there is strong bipartisan support. Even when I see this, I see the same thing, that policymakers really understand that these issues matter. They matter not only to advance our values, but it matters to our health, our economic interests, and our security interests here at home. I see this literally every day when in my own USGLC coalition, a diverse coalition that includes business leaders and faith leaders, veterans and farmers, literally across the country. Especially when I travel, I've been doing a lot virtually lately, but when I travel around the country and we host town hall meetings locally with members of Congress, and we talk about what it's worth here at home to advance and to support effective development policies in programs. And they care and they're interested in talking about these issues. But I have to say that one of the things that we have learned most profoundly in the last 2 years, within the global pandemic, seeing the progress slip in terms of our sustainable development goals, is that we're not moving fast enough. We're not moving fast enough to meet the challenges of the intractable challenges throughout the world. And so fortunately, this is what today's conversation is all about, and this is where U.S. Administrator Samantha Power comes in. So here she sits at the helm of U.S. International Development Agency. She leads the world's premier development agency and its 10,000-strong global team, the first U.S. administrator to hold a seat at the National Security Council. Those of you who know Samantha Power know she is an advocate, an ambassador, and now the administrator. As a journalist and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and a tireless advocate for human rights, for those whose lives have been upended by conflict and disaster, she is someone who knows the world and knows it well. But she also, the world knows her. As the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, she has led America's diplomacy at the UN, helping to rally the world to tackle everything from Ebola, helping at the UN, to helping to rally the world on climate, the Paris Accord, to bold actions on refugees and defending civil society. Now, she is the administrator, bringing her remarkable leadership, her expertise, and her tenacious passion to elevate the agency to new heights and to tackle so many challenges and to drive, as Joel said, the next chapter of transformation to USAID. Now, extra bonus for today's program is we're going to get to meet, and you're all going to get to meet, Katryna Mahoney, a 2020 USAID Payne Fellow and a Georgetown School of Foreign Service master's student, who will moderate the conversation with Samantha Power after her remarks. So everybody, please join me in welcoming USAID Administrator Samantha Power as she shares a new vision for global development. Welcome, Administrator.
Thank you so much. Thank you. To be together, I don't know that I'd even fully appreciated how much I'd missed it. And to be in a classroom with students, particularly students of this incredible institution. Thank you, Dean Hellman, for hosting us today and for your inspiring remarks. I really cannot overstate the impact that this school has had on America's foreign policy. And I am honored, truly, to address the young people who fill its halls. Thank you so much, Liz, for that introduction and for the longtime support and advocacy of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. When you first started this coalition, Liz, the United States Agency for International Development, battered by budget cuts, was arguably on the verge of extinction. We may not have had a 50th anniversary, let alone a 60th, without the work that you and many others did to rally our nation's diplomatic corps, our military, our private sector, our nonprofits, and the general public in building broad bipartisan support for our mission and our funding. Because if we are going to eliminate COVID-19 and head off the next pandemic, if we are going to slow climate change and build the clean industries of the future, if we are going to reverse the decline in democracy we've witnessed for 15 straight years and carry freedom forward, then we need more than a big budget. We need a big tent. In 1951, a young congressman had just returned to his Georgetown home, just blocks from this auditorium, after a 7-week whirlwind tour around the world. Prior to this man's trip through the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and East and Southeast Asia, he had been dismissed by many as a lightweight, with little to contribute in the world of foreign affairs. But on his travels, this young congressman saw nationalist movements and struggles for independence taking hold. And time and again, he saw the United States backing its Western allies and their colonial ambitions at the expense of people's aspirations. He came away convinced that America needed a foreign policy rooted more in its values and more in listening to what people in the rest of the world actually wanted for themselves. In a radio address after his trip, he argued that the answers to the ills of the world lay in America's own foundations, in, quote, its realization of the right of others to the independence that we cherish, end quote. And, quote, its passionate belief that man can deal effectively with his enemies, such as poverty and want, end quote. America needed to energize its approach to the world with fresh ideas and widespread participation. Foreign policy, he said, is too important to all of us to leave it to the experts and the diplomats. His remarks were widely dismissed. His ideas were rejected as naive. His own father responded in a radio address where he ridiculed his son's idea that America needed a new approach. But 10 years later, John F. Kennedy would become President of the United States. And in an executive order signed on November 3rd, 1961, 6 decades ago this week, he would found USAID and cement his belief in a world in which America extended its hand to those in need. And that when it did so, that world would be freer, healthier, more peaceful, and more prosperous. Across 60 years, USAID has been a remarkable force for progress in the world. We have helped nations eradicate smallpox, turn the tide against HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis, and snuff out Ebola. We have helped billions escape fates of near feudal poverty and deprivation and helped transform societies from conditions of scarcity to abundance. We have responded to more than 2,900 disasters, and we have backed democratic transitions or supported elections in nearly 90 countries since the end of the Cold War alone, among many, many other accomplishments. It is a phenomenal legacy beyond what anyone might have imagined 60 years ago. Yet, as USAID's footprint and our mission grew and the demands on our workforce expanded, the agency was forced to transition from undertaking projects directly with local communities to managing implementing partners. Mounting paperwork meant less direct engagement. The agency faced frequent political headwinds. Its funding and staffing were frequently scrutinized and slimmed down, and its authorities were splintered during bureaucratic turf wars, even as its responsibilities surged in tackling a growing number of crises around the globe. Like any institution buffeted by outside forces, it turned inward. USAID relied over time on fewer partners to execute its programs. It recruited from the same handful of schools, Georgetown, but not Howard, Johns Hopkins, but not Florida International. And despite its track record of inspiring results, most Americans didn't know much about it or what it was up to. Yet never before have our fates been so intertwined with those of people around the world. The foreign policy community, as you all know here, has been saying for decades that problems cross borders. We used to call them problems without passports. They've been saying for decades that what happens abroad matters at home. And though people understand that rationally, and have for some time, today it isn't just an intellectual argument. It is a felt, lived experience. It is losing our friends and loved ones, our grandparents and colleagues, to a disease that originated halfway around the world and forever altered the global economy. It is almost 3 centuries of carbon pollution leading to storms that flood our streets and subways, fires that darken our skies, deep freezes that break our pipes, and droughts that turn our farmlands to dust. It is oligarchs who raise our housing costs by buying up properties with laundered money, foreign hackers who infect our computers with ransomware, and autocrats who try to manipulate our elections and spread disinformation to sow division in our society. But we must do more than simply argue the importance of international development to our lives here at home. We also must work to change international development. As John F. Kennedy said, we can't leave it up to the experts and the diplomats. We must offer people not a vision merely of international development, but a vision of inclusive development. I mean that in 3 ways. First, we have to broaden our coalition to allow people from more diverse backgrounds and partners of all kinds to participate in this development mission. We must make aid more accessible, in other words. Second, we must shift our thinking to be more focused on the voices and needs of the most marginalized. We must make aid more equitable. And third, in confronting some of the biggest challenges of our time, COVID-19, climate change, growing authoritarianism, we must listen to what our partners in the countries where we work are asking of us. We must make aid more responsive. These are the changes that I will prioritize during my tenure at USAID. So first, and this involves you all, we will need help. Over several years, USAID's workforce has been sorely depleted, and our current numbers of civil service and foreign service staff are well short of our needs, even as global conflicts are lasting longer, development needs are accelerating, and the number of complex emergencies we deal with each year has ballooned in the last 2 decades from 16 to 44. As a result, USAID has created unsustainable workarounds to fill staffing shortfalls. Some 90% of our positions in our global health, humanitarian assistance, and conflict prevention and stabilization bureaus, 3 separate bureaus, 90% are on short-term contracts. So to this end, we will seek to increase our career workforce over the next 4 years. To build a brighter future, we need to staff our agency for the future. But this means staffing up differently than we have in the past. Today, Hispanic and Indigenous staff and persons with disabilities, for example, are significantly underrepresented at USAID. While the percentages are somewhat more representative with regards to Asian, Black, and African American staff, they, like all people of color at USAID, are significantly underrepresented in senior positions and policy and technical roles. If we want an agency that reflects the best of what America has to offer, all of our dynamism, all of our fresh perspectives, all of our best thinking, then we must prioritize the hiring and retention of staff that look like America. Since joining USAID, I have been the beneficiary of tireless work that our career staff undertook to devise a new diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. Because of their groundwork, I was able to sign that strategy on my first day in office. And I have been privileged to host our first ever Historically Black Colleges and Universities recruiting conference, followed by our first ever Hispanic Serving Institution recruiting event. Going forward, we will aim to increase our budget for paid internships by nearly 700% to more than $4.5 million, because we know that unpaid internships can be a barrier to entry for candidates from underrepresented communities. In partnership with Howard University, we plan to double the number of Donald M. Payne fellowships, which help fellows pay for 2 years of graduate school before receiving Foreign Service appointments at USAID. And I am so excited to sit down with one of our incoming Payne fellows, Katryna Mahoney, after my speech. Our most recent class of Foreign Service officers at USAID is our most diverse class ever. And as we staff up, we've got to break that record year after year. But recruiting diverse candidates into public service is only half the battle. We also want to retain them by creating the kind of welcoming, nurturing environment they deserve and supporting their opportunities to grow and thrive. For the first time, USAID will bring on board a Chief Diversity Officer who will report directly to me and help us hold ourselves accountable to these goals. I will prioritize equity among our staff, regardless of whether they're hired as Foreign Service officers, civil servants, locally hired Foreign Service nationals, or third-party contractors. Our contract staff, who I alluded to earlier, often dispatched to some of the world's most dangerous places, deserve basic benefits like retirement accounts, parental leave, and health and life insurance. And our locally hired Foreign Service national staff are the heart and soul of our missions overseas. They provide continuity for our work as American staff rotate through. They are leading experts across a wide range of USAID priorities, yet currently their opportunities for advancement are capped, and their benefits are inequitable compared to their American peers. We are committed to opening up new pathways for growth and development for our locally employed staff, our Foreign Service nationals, commensurate with their experience and their expertise. In addition to making USAID more accessible in terms of who joins our ranks, we also have to vastly expand the groups with whom we partner, especially the private sector, if we hope to make a sustainable difference. USAID currently has 750 active private sector partnerships, today worth about $60 billion. And here's the good news, for every public dollar we put forward, we are typically able to leverage around $6 of private money. We've done this to enlist Coca-Cola, for example, to bring its logistic expertise, you literally can buy a Coke anywhere in the world to move medicines across Africa. We have partnered with Keurig and Starbucks to support coffee farmers throughout the world. We have worked with Google to build fiber optic cable in Liberia. But these projects tend to be one-offs rather than being taken to scale globally. They're often too slow, we're often really too slow and too bureaucratic for all but the most patient partners. And these partnerships often ask too little of the businesses with whom we work, seeking support for a particular project, but not actually enlisting their help in pushing for broader reforms. So today, I'm pleased to announce that we intend to launch a centralized, flexible fund devoted to private sector engagement. Coupled with critical bureaucratic reforms, this will allow us to be far more nimble and strategic in mobilizing businesses around the world to advance our core priorities, such as advancing women's participation in the economy. To make it easier for America's vibrant small businesses, NGOs, faith-based organizations, minority-serving institutions, diaspora groups, and foundations to partner with USAID, today we are also launching workwithusaid.org. That site is our new welcome mat, a one-stop shop that lets any organization know exactly how to pursue USAID partnerships, including offering, for example, online courses that will help you bid for our awards. It is crucial that we engage more frequently and more intensely and sustainably with the broader range of partners that I've mentioned, as they offer a scale that no single development agency can truly reach. So we have to lower barriers for these kinds of organizations and institutions to join our mission. Now, that's especially true of the local organizations and companies based in the countries in which we work. When we partner with these local NGOs and local businesses, we have an opportunity to double our impact, to not just manage a project and deliver results, which is important, but to grow the local capacity of that business or organization so its impact will be sustained long after its relationship with USAID ends. Yet, in the last decade, despite numerous efforts, initiatives, and even support from Capitol Hill, the amount of USAID dollars going to local partners increased only from 4% to 6%. As recently as 2017, 60% of our assistance was awarded to just 25 partners. This is because, there are a number of reasons, but it's largely because working with local partners, it turns out, is more difficult, it's more time-consuming, and it's riskier. Local partners often lack the internal accounting expertise that our contracts require, or they might lack the legal counsel needed to shape their contracts, many of which can run hundreds of pages long. So clearly, this status quo, as the percentages illustrate this, the status quo is tough to shift. There is a lot of gravity pulling in the opposite direction, but we have got to try. So moving forward, we are going to provide at least a quarter of all of our funds directly to local partners over the course of the next 4 years. To support the burden, and the burden is real, that this will place on our missions, we will expand our capacity to issue and manage awards across the agency and expand the authorization for our foreign service nationals, our locally employed staff, to play a larger role in awarding and managing assistance. We're going to begin this effort here in our own hemisphere. And today, I am pleased to announce the launch of our new Centro America Local initiative, through which we intend to devote $300 million to work directly with local organizations in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to create locally driven, sustainable progress over the next 5 years. That last effort is so crucial and brings me to my second point. If we truly want to make aid inclusive, local voices need to be at the center of everything we do. We've got to tap into the knowledge of local communities and their lived experiences. Otherwise, we risk reinforcing the systemic inequities that are already in place. As Americans with a fraught history living up to our own values, we've got to approach this work with intention and with humility. But the entire development community needs to interrogate the traditional power dynamics of donor-driven development and look for ways to amplify the local voices of those who too often have been left out of the conversation. At USAID, in addition to a 25% target of our assistance going to local partners, today I'm announcing that by the end of the decade, 50% of our programming, at least half of every dollar we spend, will need to place local communities in the lead to either co-design a project, set priorities, drive implementation, or evaluate the impact of our programs. We are also taking steps to strengthen the Inclusive Development Office that we opened last year. In addition to our 50% local voices target, which I just mentioned, we are going to keep pushing forward with changes that will enable our staff to better focus our programs so they reach women and girls and marginalized groups, including indigenous communities, LGBTQI people, persons with disabilities, and racial, ethnic, and religious minorities. Today, very few of our missions have a staff member focused on the specific challenges facing marginalized groups in a particular country. Going forward, we want every mission to have a dedicated Foreign Service officer whose primary focus is gender equality and inclusive development. That person will help us institutionalize this work and make a focus on aid equity, not just someone's intention, but an important part of someone's career. When it comes to empowering women and girls, an investment that pays huge economic and security dividends, I plan to ask every bureau to at least double the percentage of their work that advances gender equality and report to me regularly about these efforts. Finally, we want to make sure that we are deploying the latest insights in economics and behavioral science to make sure our programs have the impact on underserved communities that we truly intend for them to have. Let me give you an example here. One of the biggest barriers that we face in trying to prevent HIV/AIDS around the world is social stigma. Women make up more than half of the people living with HIV. But even though we now have pills that can prevent HIV infections before they happen, behavioral research demonstrated that taking preventive medication still carried with it the impression of illness, still carried that stigma. Now, rationally, if you're thinking about rational man on whom public policy was predicated for generations, we would expect that people who need life-saving drugs or, say, a vaccine will take them, right? But as I hope we all know by now, we can't assume that we know how people will behave. We can't assume that what works in one culture or community will easily work in another. To understand human behavior, we need concrete data, not intuitions or assumptions. And by actually engaging with the young women at risk of HIV infections and hearing from them, we were actually able to redesign and rebrand the preventive medication that I was speaking of. Instead of a pill bottle, it now comes in a container that looks like lip gloss. We are now saving lives because we listened. This is the core premise of behavioral science, that to make progress, we have to understand human behavior, gathering and applying evidence from the communities we serve. And to deploy this kind of analysis in our program design, as well as to help us integrate insights from randomized control trials and other empirical assessments of potential programs, I intend to establish a new office of behavioral science and experimental economics that will report to a new, elevated, and expanded chief economist, a position your chair here at Georgetown, Steve Radelet, once held. And he's cheering, so I must be on the right track. I hope I'm on the right track. So here we go. We were going to make aid more accessible to people and organizations who want to participate. We will make it more equitable in terms of the impact it will have on the ground. But when I say we need to make aid inclusive, I also mean we need to listen to what our partner nations actually want. Across all of our programming now, we have a real opportunity to make our aid more responsive. Let me illustrate, if I could, using 3 of the biggest challenges we face today: COVID-19, climate change, and the rise of corrupt autocracies. On COVID-19, clearly we've heard that our partners want vaccines. Thanks to President Biden's global commitment to become the world's arsenal of vaccines, we are racing to deliver more than 1 billion doses of the Pfizer vaccine, as well as 200 million surplus domestic doses to low and lower middle income countries, while pressing other countries to step up with their own vaccine donations. Yet, the vast majority of these vaccines are produced by the world's largest economies, even though the vast majority of need, not just on COVID, but on disease generally, is in developing countries, making this gap one of the starkest problems poor countries have faced during the pandemic, and a risk to future global health and future global health equity. Well before this pandemic showcased this challenge, the entire continent of Africa, home to more than 1.2 billion people, produced only 1% of the vaccines that the people in the continent consumed. Countries don't want to depend on others for vaccines any more than they want to depend on us for foreign assistance. That is why the United States is already working to significantly bolster vaccine manufacturing capacity abroad in countries like India and South Africa, and looking to do far more. This will not only bring hundreds of millions of vaccine doses directly to the markets that need them most, but allow developing countries to respond more quickly and effectively to their own health needs. We will also continue to use this global COVID-19 vaccine push to strengthen health systems in partner countries, strengthening cold chains, supporting the health workforce, and improving health information management. We have to get shots in arms today, we know, but we should do it in a way that leaves countries better positioned to treat their populations tomorrow. To that end, alongside our efforts to increase the supply of COVID-19 vaccines and strengthen local health systems, we will work with countries around the world to develop the global, regional, and country-level capabilities needed to meet future pandemic threats. As part of this effort, we are doubling the number of partner countries we will support in preventing and detecting pandemic threats. And after receiving countless cries for help from countries in crisis during this pandemic, we are establishing a new and dedicated USAID Emergency Response Unit to lead on infectious disease outbreaks, including by facilitating rapid surge capacity when an outbreak occurs. With climate change, earlier this week, President Biden was in Glasgow, where he cemented the U.S.'s ambitions to cut our carbon pollution in half by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. We are on the verge of the largest legislative effort we have ever seen to make clean energy cheaper at home, create hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs, make our air and water cleaner, and advance the cause of environmental justice. But environmental justice does not end at our shores. Poor countries, those that had the least to do with a changing climate, but the most to lose in experiencing its effects, are asking for our help. As a wealthy nation responsible for much of the carbon pollution currently in our atmosphere, we bear a special responsibility to help poorer nations with little emissions of their own manage the worst impacts of a warming planet. Later tonight, I'm going to fly to Glasgow, as it happens, to support a major initiative that President Biden announced to do just that. The President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation or Resilience, or PREPARE. Together with the support of Congress, the U.S. government is requesting $3 billion annually for something poor countries have been asking us for: funds to help in some of the most vulnerable countries brace for a changing climate. We will help support more than 500 million people to adapt to climate change through efforts like scaling drought-tolerant agriculture, establishing early warning systems for storms, and creating new insurance schemes that can support people when their harvests fail or their livestock perish. And finally, when it comes to the imperiled state of democracy around the world, we've got to listen to those brave activists, protesters, and journalists who are crying out for respect for human rights and appealing for our support. JFK's remark that the most powerful force in the world is humankind's eternal desire to be free and independent is as true today as it was back then. Though we have seen democracies wither and militaries steal power away from civilians in Guinea, in Burma, and most recently in Sudan, progressive reform movements all around the world are working every day to show that democracy delivers. In Zambia, Moldova, and nearby in the Dominican Republic, for example, we have seen landslide victories for elected leaders who campaigned on strengthening democracy, embracing the rule of law, and fighting corruption. What we and other democracies need to do is show up. Show up and help leaders show tangible benefits as they move toward more freedom, more respect for human rights, and more accountable democratic institutions. Established democracies also need to help set global rules of the road for surveillance technologies and digital disinformation as autocrats grow savvier in their attempts to control and manipulate people. We need to help support a free and fair global press to hold leaders to account. And we need to tackle, with all the seriousness it demands, the scourge of global corruption. Corruption is basically development in reverse. It harms long-term economic development, scares away private sector investment, deepens inequality, and even harms the environment as a result of illicit logging, fishing, and polluting. It also disproportionately harms the most marginalized in a society. It is actually fully inclusive in its malignancy. It also goes hand in hand with autocracy, fueling it, because it turns out those who centralize power centralize wealth. And when it is exposed, it can elicit fury and drive people to the streets like few other issues. Of the record number of protests around the world in 2019, before the pandemic, more than half were protests against corruption, and 6 led to changes in government. President Biden has already announced bold new steps to combat corruption and shutter tax havens. And we will launch several initiatives to strengthen democracy and fight corruption at this December's Summit for Democracy. But today, I'm pleased to announce an initiative that responds to a request from a group of independent journalists I met with during my first week at USAID. It turns out that autocrats and oligarchs often employ a crude but effective tactic to kill stories they don't like. They sue reporters until those reporters abandon stories or go out of business. As a result, we are launching a global defamation defense fund to protect journalists against lawsuits that are designed to deter them from doing their work. We will offer them courage, I hope courage as well, but they don't need any courage, these journalists, coverage to survive defamation claims or deter autocrats and oligarchs from trying to sue them out of business in the first place. To counter the ever-changing threats to democracy, because they're evolving, we depend on this sort of innovation. And it is the people on the front lines who know best how we can support them. We all remember JFK's iconic line from his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." We can all recite that pretty much from memory. But do any of us know what Kennedy was asking of us? It was not actually, as it may sound, a call for local volunteerism and domestic renewal. In fact, Kennedy was asking Americans to commit themselves to global action, to struggle against tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. It was a vision for international development, offered not in some proclamation or barely read policy directive, but in the most widely watched speech President Kennedy would ever give. He spoke about foreign assistance because he wanted Americans to be proud of the role they were playing in tackling the world's greatest challenges. Today, Americans should know that for 60 years, USAID assembled some of the brightest, most dedicated, and most effective public servants in the world, and they can take pride in the impact that American generosity is having on people in need around the world. That is the agency I feel so privileged to run. That is the agency that I am so excited to further unleash, not just as an agency for international development, but as an agency for inclusive development, inclusive of this country's diverse talent and dynamic private sector, inclusive of the voices of those whom we are privileged to serve alongside, tackling problems abroad in a way that is responsive to our partners, that will save lives, and that will advance American interests and values. I thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Power.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today at Georgetown University as USAID celebrates its 60th anniversary. That was such a moving speech, and I think it really speaks to the growing role and the importance of development, right, alongside diplomacy and defense. So as a 2020 Donald and Payne Fellow, I would like to express my gratitude to you, to USAID, and to the fellows that have come before me. And I really look forward to carrying out the legacy of the late Congressman Donald Payne and promoting a more inclusive and equitable world. So one thing that I'd like to emphasize is really how much your approach, or philosophy rather, resonates with me. You center humans, their lives, their stories, their vulnerabilities, and their opportunities. And I think that that's really a key solution to many of the challenges that we face today. So thank you for reminding us of that value. With that, I'd like to follow up on your inclusive vision for development and these sort of three dimensions that you outlined, right? Pardon, I could probably take off. Yeah? Okay.
Are you okay?
You talked about these three sort of dimensions of your new vision for development. And one thing that I'd like to ask is, how USAID intends to really operationalize, for example, this localization agenda, and how it intends to measure these results, these outcomes, right? And what does that strategy look like in allowing for collaborating, adapting, and learning?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being such an amazing ambassador for the Payne Fellowship Program. I'm really excited to grow this program. Already our Payne Fellows are making such incredible contributions all around the world, so excited to get you in the mix. Hurry up. Study hard. So, yeah, no, I know. So let me start with just a little bit of historical context and say that I really admire my predecessors who have run USAID. We actually had a gathering around the anniversary of all the recent USAID administrators, and each of them, made a defining impact. I could go into that for each one of them about how I am the beneficiary of the work that they have done and the reforms that they have undertaken. And as I indicated in the speech, in recent years, all USAID administrators have set out to pursue the same objective that I just described for you here today. So, my predecessors are amazing people and like really determined people. And the staff is really dedicated to this agenda too. And yet, you heard the percentage. This is where we are. So that's why I talked about all the gravity that stands in the way. And then it's so counterintuitive that given that we're pursuing not just development, but sustainable development, that those numbers wouldn't be higher, that we wouldn't be investing in more local organizations. So part of what I've been seeking to understand better over these 6 months that I've been in the job already is kind of what's going on if all that will is there. And it turns out that contracting with USAID it's hard, it's onerous. There are a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And so nobody is setting out to simply go with the same old set of partners. It's just that there's a disparate impact of these onerous requirements on smaller, scrappy local organizations that don't have Deloitte level capacities within the organization. So you asked how we're going to go about doing it. And first of all, we've talked to our predecessors to understand, okay, you tried this, why didn't it work? Or did it work in some ways and not in the other? And on the Hill, there's huge support for this initiative. There's actually huge frustration with the percentages as they currently exist. So we're hopeful that we can translate that desire to see change into more flexibility for us to be able to sit kind of left seat, right seat with those organizations to help them build out that capacity. Now, in the short and medium term, that asks more of USAID staff, because with a large organization, you put out the request for a contract, and then the large organization has all the capacity in-house. With the smaller ones, in a sense, that kind of, it's almost like mentorship and partnership, but right now the bandwidth of our staff is stretched beyond description with COVID and all these climate shocks landing and all these development setbacks that we've all experienced in the last couple years, plus staff attrition and not having the commensurate number of staff anyway to deal with all the programming that we're doing. So that's our steady state, which is why we have to invest in the workforce. But so too, we need from Congress the flexibility for our workforce to be able to view it as part of their mission to sit down with these organizations. And again, the goal is to work ourselves out of business. So these numerical targets are new. I'm announcing them here for the first time. This Central American pilot program is new, and we will be accountable to what you have heard. And I'm hopeful that by putting this out there, knowing how much support this has, more than 4,000 of the people who work at USAID are locally employed staff, are foreign service nationals of the countries in which we work. And you can imagine how excited they are about this kind of initiative. That's something I've heard from them in all of my travels so far. But again, we do need the resources to be able to invest in doing away with the disparate impact of these regulations that just end up, in a sense, foreclosing the possibility of working with USAID, with those organizations that can't meet all the legal and accounting burdens.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm sure the agency is well on its way under your leadership, so thank you. Something that stands out to me is really this relationship between the personal and the political. While being a diplomat, a public servant, I understand that you also identify as an activist, and I would say a fierce human rights activist. My question is, how can we kind of dispel this idea that you cannot embody the two, right? How do you communicate to the activists, within us that we could also be public servants, and how do we bring our values into this public service space?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I had been an activist and a critic of American foreign policy, my whole career before I joined the Obama administration back in 2009, and I would often get asked that question, what does the old Samantha Power say to the new Samantha Power? I'd be like, they're the same person. It turns out, it's just me. My activist soul was often frustrated by the kind of bank shot that was required. You know, I had to figure out what I thought the right thing to do might have been, let's say by some government institution or international institution, but I wasn't in a position directly to do anything. So I needed someone to take up that cause, and you know, I'd write op-eds and I'd be like, oh, my prose, I nailed it, you know, and then I'm waiting for someone to read the op-ed and pick up the idea and do something with it. So for me, being outside had that other kind of frustration of you know, it wasn't even that I was so curious about what went on in the Situation Room or behind the curtain. I was a journalist as well, so I would interview people and had some sense of that, but it was more, you know, I needed to know that there was someone there who would pick it up and would just fight, you know, and to fight in the same way we were fighting on the outside. And those people, that was the most gratifying thing about joining government is there's so many people who just never give up and who are relentless in just the way activists are relentless. They just happen to be doing it with a badge around their neck. And so that's why I was so eager to come back to serve this time around. You know, in a way, in government, what I have found myself, and I think I see it in people, young people like you who join, is you bring your values, you bring your history, you know, and you're an advocate within, you're a vector. And you know, your goal is to persuade people in the same way that on the outside, you're trying to build coalitions, you're trying to organize, you're trying to inspire people to get more involved, to put pressure on different institutions. That's kind of the same skill set inside, building coalitions, inspiring people, marrying kind of story and data. I think that's like the most powerful. Advocacy often has both. If you just have data, it can kind of leave people cold, but if you just have story, you know, they want to know where's the rigor and will this work? And so my own experience is that it's more seamless than you would think, but I do feel having been on the outside for 4 years, having been in the Obama administration for 8 years, and as Obama's human rights advisor and then as UN ambassador, and then to have the experience of watching things happen where I felt like my response was to tweet, which was not as satisfying as like running a resolution of the Security Council or trying to argue with Obama about something. You know, I'm even if everything is hard and you know, certainly our polarization domestically is very worrying, and some of the dimensions, you know, some of the challenges our own democracy are facing are kind of clouds that I wasn't aware that they were looming when I was in government the last time in quite the same way I'm aware now. So none of that is ideal, but at the same time, to be back in the arena, to have the chance, you know, to work with such amazing people as work at USAID and across the US government, to be, you know, at an audience like this and to be urging people to come and join us, you know, that, to me, that ability to actually see your ideals and your activism instantiated in real resources, you know, given to real partners on the front lines, like it's very, very gratifying. And so to come in and out is also now a very viable path, I think, for people to be able to do, you know, stints on the outside where you evolve and you learn what you believe and what you want to achieve, and then bring it into the institution and try to get it done.
Thank you. Thank you for, you know, reminding us that it's really the same set of skills, right? You're just kind of bringing that in different spaces. So at this time, I think we'd like to open it up to our leaders from the USGLC, who also represent the USAID partners leading the work on the front lines around the world. And so before we open it up, I just want to first go to Jada McKenna. She is the CEO of Mercy Corps.
Thank you. And thank you, Ambassador Power.
Oh, we have a mic coming.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Ambassador Power, for laying out that powerful vision and the new programs. We're very excited to hear about it. One of the critical challenges that have been brought on by climate change and COVID are the increase in natural disasters and the increased need to shift funding to humanitarian emergencies. Obviously, my organization does both humanitarian and development work. We always are going to go to provide life-saving assistance when needed. But how do we ensure that we continue to invest and, in fact, increase our investments in long-term development, given that those threats are erasing long-term development gains, and they are key to the partnerships and local capacity and all the things that you've wonderfully laid out as being key to sustainability?
Thank you. Well, I think there are dimensions of our development work that are actually explicitly designed to bring new resources to bear, because I think I live in the world you live in, which is it's a fixed pie. And so as we have more climate shocks, as we have a historic number of displaced people, more displaced people now than at any time since Hitler, as we now have a pandemic on top of all of that, the level of food insecurity, famine, then you get new conflicts that come online like that in Tigray, and in the Tigray region now expanding in Ethiopia. And so just that number of emergencies, as you say, goes up, and if the pie is fixed, that's really challenging. You are diverting. There's a risk that one diverts more to what's the old metaphor, to providing the fish rather than the fishing rod and in the old parable. So I worry about that, but I think some of the development, we're still managing to do an awful lot of core development work and investments, which I was starting to say, in, for example, domestic resource mobilization, helping. We were actually just doing this with the fragile Sudanese government that was just overthrown in a military takeover, and we hope will get reversed here in the coming days, needs to get reversed in the coming days. But that was a government that just wasn't collecting any tax revenue. And so at the same time, we have to meet these acute food needs, especially as they do economic reforms, and that actually causes fuel and food prices to go up. And so we actually just need to do social safety net work, which is some hybrid of development and emergency, and provide wheat, to get them through the day. But also making those structural investments and providing technical assistance and guidance, and not just us, of course, the World Bank and IMF and others, so they're in a position to make that pie bigger, even though they, even if they can get back on the democratic path they were on, or the transitional democratic path they were on, they have their work cut out for them. So that's the kind of programming that I'm very drawn to, that aid is doing every day, and that's one reason that we're emphasizing so much also the private sector piece and the ability to leverage public dollars to secure more in the way of private financing. Climate change is a great example of that. There is what the public sector will do, and the $100 billion climate finance target that's been announced. But if you talk to any single country, whether the big emitters like India or South Africa, you're talking about $1 trillion needs over time. And so it's been, in the climate space, encouraging to see the private sector get more drawn to the renewables and the clean energy space, but there is less private sector interest so far in adaptation, in the kind of work that I was mentioning that we are investing in. And then lastly, I think that the part that you spend a lot of time thinking about, and that our Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs does as well, which is, I think, what you were getting at in your question, which is when you provide that emergency assistance, how to do it differently. For example, now acknowledging that displaced persons are probably not going to be able to return to their homes. There's not about to be a conflict resolution that is going to make them feel safe going back to this community or that community. So how do markets get born, where people get to bring their skills to bear, and their cash assistance, as you know, is now much more common than it would have been the last time I served in government. When a hurricane strikes, as occurred in Central America, one of the things USAID now does is really, and learning from FEMA and others here at home, and FEMA learning, I hope, from us, we now have more collaboration than we ever had before, but to coin a phrase, how do you build back better? And in Hurricane Mitch cost so many more lives, an order of magnitude more lives in Central America, same kind of magnitude of storm and impact, but actually the hurricanes that occurred, last year, same magnitude, but far fewer casualties because of the way that not just USAID, but all of our partners worked with communities in Central America to build back in different places and in a different way. And so that resilience, embedding it into how we do emergency response, I think is key. But thank you for your work, above all.
Great, thank you, Jada. I'd now like to pass it off to Candy Wolf. She is the Executive Vice President of Global Government Affairs at Citigroup.
Thank you, Administrator. I represent the business side of the USGLC, member of the board as well. And as you noted, we have in addition, Citi is a partner of USAID, but what we've seen, we've got quite a few, not just large businesses, but small businesses that are part of thousands, in fact, who are part of USGLC. And I think, part of the effort, as you laid out, is to be able to use some of our resources and help with education to really, I think, drive some of the activity that you're trying to inspire with small businesses. But I'd also like to sort of ask, and perhaps throw out an additional comment, that as you look at large partners, think about how we can be helpful in working with the small partners. And there's an existing program at Treasury, which is a mentor-protege program that's been set up for a while now that I think might be a useful program to take a look at to get some partnerships. It's through the Minority Depository Institution programs, and it's a mentor-protege. And so maybe one, as you think about how to utilize large partners to help to bring along the capability and scale up for the small partners that are not going to have that capability. So something I throw out as you think about your options.
That's great. No, I didn't know about that program, and I see the analogy. I think it's very intriguing. We do, the statistic I offered showing, again, the paucity of local partnerships or partnerships with local organizations, maybe a little misleading in the sense that we do have, prime contracting partners who then subcontract. But I think what we're looking to now think about is how do we incentivize, this is different than what you're talking about, but nonetheless also analogous to your analogy, how do we incentivize those prime contracting partners or prime grantees, not only to sort of dispense, some portion of the work to a subcontracting partner, subgrantee, but do that kind of mentorship and transfer those skills so that then the next time around, that local organization is in a position to compete. And how do you articulate this or make this happen in a way where it doesn't feel zero sum, right? Because I think it can feel, well, wait, I'm mentoring and training up my competition. I mean, it shouldn't feel that way, again, because we're all after the same, I hope, the same set of development objectives on the ground. But we'll look at that program, and if you have more ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Candy. Okay, so we are running out of time, but we do have time for 2 questions. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand. And someone with a mic will come to you. Please keep it brief for the sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Power and Administrator Power, for coming to speak with us today. I really admire your work. The question that I have for you pertains to kind of the overarching mission of USAID. So I think one of the challenges, I read in your foreign affairs piece that one of the ways that America can kind of get back on track after 4 years of lackluster leadership is by restoring competence. And I think that one of the challenges that a lot of critics of USAID might say is that it's very hard for America to lecture other countries on things like democracy when we have voter suppression at home, and very hard for us to support inclusive development when we ourselves have a past and present of racial inequity. So kind of one question that I have for you is, how do we avoid that hypocrisy, and how do we promote our values when we ourselves have at times not lived up to those values?
It's a great question. I would say, I mean, to state the obvious, with great and demonstrated humility, right? With candor, naming the elephant in the room. But I think that, there are some who would say that what's going on domestically or has gone on domestically is inherently disqualifying. And for them, or for that argument, I would just ask them to go out and talk to the partners that we're supporting. Because in many cases, we're all they have, right? Like, I mean, this defamation fund, like if they can access those resources, that's the difference between being able to write the story to hold the corrupt mayor accountable or the corrupt police chief accountable or not, potentially, if we could, in bringing that fund online. In the field of global health, I mean, that's in some ways an easy one, right? It's just PEPFAR, George W. Bush's creation that has just tens of millions of lives saved. Kids who have not been orphaned because of this work. And this equity focus, also is the product of the movements here at home that have offered a wake-up call. I mean, you might say that we had so many wake-up calls over the years, like how many times do you have to wake up? But the extent to which this is not going to change overnight, but that we are in our assistance or in our approach internationally that we're doing stopgap, right? That we're not in at the structural level. I think that's been a critique of foreign assistance for some time, and I think it's a very fair critique. And figuring out how simultaneously to keep our partners afloat and keep their programming going, which is maybe saving lives or strengthening the rule of law or holding bad actors accountable, how to keep that going and at the same time make room for a deeper understanding ourselves, bringing in a sense the recognition about systemic injustices and challenges here, bringing that perspective to the way we partner. That's part of what I'm trying to get at here. And it's not, again, we have habits built over many years. It's gonna just, as we do here. But I think the answer can't be don't support people, in their hour of, and then their protracted hour of need in a pandemic with climate shock where the emissions originally came from us, right? The answer has to be figuring out how to do it differently, and to follow the lead of people who want nothing more than not to have to work with USAID in the future, right? I mean that's fundamentally we all have to be part of that shared objective, which is, my predecessor, Mark Green, called it self-reliance, dignity, agency, and hearing that, respecting that, and programming around that is what we want to do. But to talk about it, we talk about it much more than we do. Our challenges, people bring them up. People say, "Have you tried this?" on voter suppression. Like we have a lot in common on voter suppression and disinformation and cybersecurity and rejecting the results of elections. Like we got a lot to talk about these days. So.
Great. We'll take one more question.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator. I wanted to ask, so in the post-Benghazi era of diplomacy, state and USAID have often been restricted to operating out of fortress embassies. And so as you look into engaging more of local partners, how do you see AID working around the security conditions to make sure that our partners can still see human faces?
Thank you. Well, I know Secretary Blinken also has addressed this recently and recognizing the importance of U.S. diplomats as well being out and about, looking for ways to ensure that that happens. And I will say, I didn't say this in the speech, but if you haven't read President Biden's UN General Assembly speech, I think it's a pretty powerful call to move from this era of what he called relentless war to relentless diplomacy and defense. But to do that requires addressing, I think, the premise of your question in the diplomatic and the development realms. I think where I would start is just to underscore a point I made in the speech about USAID, the particular nature of USAID's workforce internationally, and how central our locally employed staff, so-called, are to our work. I mean, I think we have more than 4,500 of our 10,000 person strong workforce are foreign service nationals. So, in Guatemala, that's Guatemalans. In Senegal, that's Senegalese. In Vietnam, that's Vietnamese. I mean, these are, and, they may, I mean, now with COVID, people in different places aren't even working at the embassy, but even if they are working at an embassy that is post-Benghazi more, less accessible than it once was, they're going home, they're out in their communities, they're our eyes and ears. So I think that's a comparative advantage that USAID has retained, is just that reliance on this talent and expertise. And some of these individuals work in administrative roles at our missions, but often they're like PhDs in land use and microbiology and long-time technocrats on elections and how they should be managed. And so there's real expertise there, and that ability, to your point, in living in the communities and in getting out and about, for them also to be ambassadors for this agenda, I think will be very important. And so I think loosening these strictures and being in a position for all of our staff to be out and about, but the empowerment and elevation of those perspectives, I think also will be very helpful in this regard. Thank you.
We could go on all day, and I would love to do that, but Administrator Power needs to be up on Capitol Hill very soon, so we need to bring this to a close. I want to thank her for joining us and for that really powerful vision. When I was at AID, people who were there during the Obama administration will remember we had USAID Forward, and this sounds like USAID Way Forward. So we're looking forward to seeing that. I want to thank everyone here in the audience who's with us live, those that are live streaming, thank you for joining us. Those that are in the overflow room, thanks for joining us. I want to thank Joel and his team here at SFS that pulled this off, Emily, Marie, Brianna, Jordan, and everyone who's done so much work to pull this together. Let me thank Liz Schrayer and the USGLC team for everything they've done, Katryna and all of the Payne Fellows for everything they're doing. And finally, just all the students that are here today, you do represent the future, and I want to thank you for your commitment, for your energy, for correcting me every time that I'm wrong, which is very often, and that all you're doing, and I just look forward to, in the coming years, how we can all work together to make the world a better place. So thank you for joining us today.